Hello, students, professors, and doctors. My name is Jacalyn Columbia, and this is my semester project for Business of Wine. Business of Wine has given me an overview of the wine business, including importers, wholesalers, grape growing, making wine, retailing in supermarkets, restaurants, and liquor stores, and doing analytical tastings. Analytical tastings for me was probably my favorite part of the class, being that when you analyze wine, it's kind of like getting to know somebody because there's so much character involved in that wine, and it kind of takes you on a little bit of a ride. It's kind of cool. And being that I am a food and beverage supervisor, I this really has given me an understanding of what wines to match with food. So don't hate my wine glass right now. I'm a little short in supplies, being that I just moved to Denver, Colorado. And again, I received a food and beverage supervisor position at the Brown Palace Hotel. So this class has made it more interesting for me, being that we have a wide range of wine in what we call the wine Bible. It's pretty insane. So, what I'm really going to be talking about in this project is wine itself. What is it? Well, for a quick, brief overview, wine is an alcoholic beverage made with fermented juice of grapes. Technically, wine can be made from any fruit, apples, cranberries, plums, etc. But most wines are made with wine grapes, which are very different from table grapes. Speaking of differences, the difference between wine and beer is that beer is made from fermenting brewed grains. So, very simply, wine is made from fruit and beer is made from grains. Of course, there are exceptions that push the boundaries of beer, but that story is for another time. So, cheers. And here is my semester project being, what is wine? Exactly. Let's talk about what's inside a bottle of wine. We have the acid anthocyanin, which is typically consists of tartaric acid, malic acid, lactic acid, citric acid, succinic acid, and acetic acid. That's a lot of acid. Well, wine lies on the acidic side of the pH spectrum. This is because wine grapes contain acid, and these acids transfer into the wine. Acidity in wines usually range from super sour at around 2.5 pH, which is high acidity, to a very flat at around 4.5 pH, which is low acidity. And when you drink wine, you notice that white wines tend to have higher acidity than reds. Other compounds that are in the bottle of wine is water, alcohol, which is made during the fermentation process, and sugar and minerals. This is when they say a glass of wine a day is particularly good for you because it has iron, nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, fluoride, sulfur, and calcium. To make wine, it actually needs, to make a bottle of wine, you need 2.1 pounds of grapes. So you figure it's approximately 460 grapes to make dry white wine and approximately 600 grapes to make dry red wine. Now, the question is, what is the difference between the wine grape and the table grape? Like the picture you see all the way to the left, which are your table grapes, which you can find in your local grocery store, have less acidity and also less sugar than a wine grape. Wine grapes are lean and mean. They are grown to produce the sweetest and most potent grapes. They are smaller, have a lot more seeds, have thicker skins, and a higher juice content. Wine grapes can taste pretty good when they're ripe, but their thick skins and tannins make them less fun to eat than your table grape. Most wines are made from the single species of grape that originated in Caucasus, called Vitis vinifera. Yeah, we all heard that name. There are thousands of different varieties within the Vitis vinifera species, with the most common being Cabernet Sauvignon, which is the second picture to the left, followed by the Merlot grape and the Chardonnay grape. Now, when you go to the store to buy a bottle of wine, you'll notice something on the label that looks like a particular year. It will say 2012, 2011, 2015, 2016. You get what I mean. This is talking about the vintage of the wine. Wine grapes take an entire season to ripen, and thus wine is produced just once a year. This is where the term vintage comes from. Vint, which stands for winemaking, and age implies to the year it was made. So when you see a vintage year listed on the label, that's the year the grapes were picked and made into the wine, also known as the harvest season. The harvest season in the Northern Hemisphere, like Europe and the US, is made from August to September. And the harvest season in the Southern Hemisphere, like Argentina and Australia, is from February to April. Now, there are also wines that are labeled as non-vintage wine, or also known as NV. Occasionally, you'll find a wine without a vintage listed on the label. Typically, this is a blend of several vintages together. And in this case of champagne, it will be labeled NV, which stands for non-vintage. As the wine word non-vintage is most often used in regard to champagne and sparkling wine, as well as many fortified wines like port, sherry, and Madeira, if a wine does not carry a vintage year, like I said, it is generally described as non-vintage, and in that the grapes used did not come from a single vintage. Let's talk about a single varietal wine. A single varietal wine is made primarily with one type of grape. For example, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Chardonnay, etc. It's common to see these wines labeled by the name of that grape variety. For example, like in the pictures you see of Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon is made with Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. It's useful to note that each country has different rules for how much of a variety should be included in order to be labeled as a varietal wine. So the percentage required for USA, Chile, South Africa, Australia, and Greece is 75%. That means 75% of that wine should be made from Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. Argentina is 80%, Italy, France, Germany, Austria, Portugal, Spain, and New Zealand is 85%. And weirdly enough, Oregon requires 90% of the varietal. Um, it wasn't always like this for Oregon, but Oregon's wine industry pressed for labeling regulations stricter than those required by the federal law government. It was and is a matter of integrity. Recognizing the importance of a place and variety in the creation of wines, Oregon's labeling regulations reflect the approach of its winemakers since the industry founding days. So, besides wines having a single varietal, often winemakers will make wine blends. Blending makes wines more complex. Blending is used to maximize the expression of the wine. Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon are often added for structure or tannin concentration to make a more powerful wine. Creating the perfect blend also depends on the characteristics of the year and the expression of each grape. where in this instance, the Dreaming Tree Crush, which is from California, has a blend of Merlot, Zinfandel, Petit Syrah, and Tannat. A wine blend is a wine made with a blend of several grape varieties. Blending is a traditional method of winemaking, and today there are several famous wine blends produced in a classic winemaking regions. Just so you know, most wine blends are mixed together after the fermentation and aging is complete. When grapes are blended and fermented together, it is called a field blend. As a winemaker, it is very important for them to do a small investment in a wine analysis because it can save them a fortune in lost sales because the wine wasn't, well, good. There are several facts that explain a wine's unique flavor, which are acidity, sweetness, alcohol, tannin, and aroma compounds that are produced in the fermentation process. The next slides, I'm going to do and explain um, the factors that give the wine its unique flavor. Wine lies on the acidic side of the pH spectrum. This is because wine grapes contain acids, and these acids transfer into the wine. Acidity in wines range from super sour at around 2.5 pH, which is a high acidity, to a very flat at around 4.5 pH, which is low acidity. You'll also notice that white wines tend to have higher acidity than red wines. In wine tasting, the term acidity refers to the fresh, tart, and sour attributes of the wine, which are evaluated in relation to how well the acidity balances out the sweetness and bitter components of the wine, such as tannins. Three primary acids are found in wine grapes, which are tartaric, malic, and citric acid. Another factor in tasting wine is sweetness. Depending on what style of wine you drink, sweetness in wine ranges from having no sugar at all to sweet, like maple syrup. And the term dry refers to a wine without sweetness. When you look on a wine bottle, the alcohol content is known as the ABV, which is alcohol by volume. The taste of alcohol is primarily spicy. It's palate coating and it warms the back of your throat. Wine's average range of alcohol is about 10% ABV to about 15% ABV. Of course, there are a few exceptions. The examples I gave you for different kinds of ABV levels, like Moscato on the left, is as low as 5.5 ABV, and on our right, a port is fortified with a neutral brandy, upping it to 20% ABV. So a few glasses of that port, you'll be feeling kind of nice. Another factor you'll experience while drinking wines are the tannins. Grape tannin comes from the skin, seeds, and stems of a wine grape. For this reason, red wines tend to have higher tannins than white wines because the extended contact of the grape skins with the juice give the tannins time to dissolve in the alcohol and water in the wine. Tannin is found, like I said, in red wines and contributes to the astringent quality of the red wine. If you want to know what I mean by tannin, for example, put a wet black tea bag on your tongue. And that's how tannin tastes. And now the aroma compounds. This is going to be your first encounter and introduction of the wine. As soon as you open the bottle of wine, a wide range of aromas and smells are going to come out, especially if you decant a red wine. Within the tiny munition of wine, phenols, esters, higher alcohols, acids, etc., is where you'll find the complexities to the wine's flavors and aromas. Each grape variety exhibits aroma compounds at different levels. This is why some wines smell like berries and others smell like flowers. Another contributing factor to the wine's aroma is aging. Nearly all red wines are aged in oak, which not only contributes in oak barrel's flavor compounds like vanillin or vanilla, but also acts as a conduit to expose the wine to oxygen. Oxidation and aging produce a range of unique flavors to a wine, including nuttiness and dried fruit flower flavors. So that completes my beginner's guide of what wine is exactly. And wine can be very simple, but it does become more complex. And the more you study it, the more you understand what it has to offer. You don't really need to know a lot about wine to drink it, but you start to appreciate it more when you look into the wine you're drinking. So that is all, and enjoy your next bottle of wine. Have a good night.